So I wanted to share with you over the next couple of hours this sort of work that we've been doing with sporting clubs across the Northern Territory and other parts of Australia as well. And it's taken a long time to get going. I'll give you some history on that in just a moment, where it all comes from. But just briefly, my background. So as I said, my name's Charlie King, but my Gurindji name is Kiwar, which is what the Gurindji people call me. I was born in Alice Springs in 1951. I moved to Darwin in 1966, and I've been there ever since. I've got 8 sisters, 5 daughters, and 2 wives. Not at the same time. Not at the same time, to make that clear. So I worked as a brick maker, a bulldozer driver, a builder, a mechanic, a sporting person in football and cricket. I worked as a child protection worker, as a student, and also a sport broadcaster. The work that I did as a child protection worker lasted for about 17 years, and like a lot of you in this room, had to deal with some of the horrific cases of child abuse that actually happens. And I know in Darwin, where I work, each month we'd sit down and review the levels of child abuse that happen. There's often 70 cases, that have happened. It just never gets any better, So it was a horrifying thing. And I saw some things in there that made me think to myself, this is a bother for us, because family violence was so strongly connected to the child protection that was actually happening. And I keep thinking to myself, we need to do more about that. And then we have some public meetings, and we get groups like this, and it's probably a little bit like this, but you seem to have a better representation of men here today than those groups that we were involved with. It'd be 80-90% women and just a couple of men all the time. And I kept thinking to myself, why don't men come to these discussions? Why aren't we talking about this issue? That's a terrible thing that we're actually faced with. So that's some of my background. But in 2006, I was asked by the Northern Territory government if I would travel around the Northern Territory and talk to Aboriginal communities about pornography classifications. Talk to men about pornography classifications so they understand the classification. So I agreed to do it on one proviso, that I was allowed to ask that question, why is it that men don't talk about family violence? Why is it that men don't talk about child protection? Why is it that they will talk to me about pornography, but they won't talk to me about those other issues? And so they were fine with me being able to do that. At that time, I was already a sports broadcaster, so I was doing the football on television and on radio and wherever. And so men would know I was coming to their community, and I wouldn't say why. I'd say I was just coming, Charlie King's visiting on Thursday, and men would turn up in good numbers. And we'd talk football, and we'd talk sport for an hour or two, and then I'd ask them those questions. Can we just talk a little bit about family violence? Can we talk a little bit about child protection? And I found some really interesting things. I found that, firstly, men didn't understand the terminology when we're talking about child protection. This is the men out bush that we travelled around these communities in the Territory. They didn't understand the terminology. So if we talked about substantiated child abuse, they didn't know what that was. They didn't understand that was. They understood child and abuse. And so I remember asking a group of about 30 men at a little place outside Tea Tree, and I said to them, have a think about child abuse and tell me what you think it is. I'm going to go and get a cup of tea when I come back. Tell me what you think. So I went and got a cup of tea when I come back. They did a presentation. They said child abuse is when you swear at your children. So that was their understanding of it. And so they said what we're going to do is plan to stop swearing with our children. So very limited knowledge of what child abuse was all about. And so in the report we wrote, we were saying that the language needs to be explained more in more simple terms what child abuse is if we want men to do more to stop it. So that was an interesting thing. The other thing that I found interesting was that in any group of men that we met with, and on some of those communities there could be, 50 men would turn up or 60 men would turn up, but there were a little small group of men, maybe 5 or 6 men, that felt really strongly that we should do more to protect the community. Protect the women, protect the children, do more to sort out the fighting that was going on. And we found out, to our alarm, that there was another group of men, almost the same size, 5 or 6 men, who felt really strongly that you should just all nick off and go away, leave them to do what they've always done. So these two groups were sort of working against each other. And in the middle, was this whole big group of men who really had no idea where they fitted. They didn't quite know whether it was this group or that group. And so this smaller group who didn't want you to do anything, were more vocal and held positions of higher power, were more influential, they would change the view of that group in the middle to be a little bit more like them. So we set about trying to empower that smaller group that was saying, let's do more about this. The challenge for us, of course, was that group was a quieter group and didn't feel comfortable about saying we need to do more to fix this problem. So we had to try and build them up to the point where they were being heard so they could build a bit of an army themselves to help them do more to stop the family violence. So in those travels, I got an opportunity to go out to Untitled, which is a beautiful community west of Alice Springs. It's the Walpurgis people, and I met with a group of men out there, and I was telling them about family violence and how big the problem was. And I remember an old guy, an old Aboriginal elder by the name of Ned Hargraves. He just kept staring at me when I was telling him how big the problem was. I said, how big is it here at Untitled? And they'd say, well, you know, we have some fights and arguments and whatever. And I said, you know, in Australia, this is how big it is, you know? And I would tell them those stats. I think Carla mentioned some of them earlier, you know. Indigenous women, 35 times more likely to go to hospital, you know. 500,000 women get sexually and physically abused in our country every year, one every minute. So one every minute, if I talk to you for 10 minutes, that's what, be 10 more victims. And he looked at me, and like Aboriginal people do, he shook his finger in front of my eyes like that. He said, no more, no more. Which is a good, strong Aboriginal statement of saying, let's get rid of this. So if somebody passes away, what happened to old Harry? No more, finish. That's what they say. So we said, let's use that. That's a strong statement to use. We can use no more. And so when we travelled around to other communities, we went to them and said, you know, those old Walpurgis men talk about no more. They say no more to family violence. What do you think? And other men would say to us, well, we should all link up. We should all link up. I remember thinking to myself when I'm driving back from Papunya or wherever it was, I was thinking, there's two really strong things there. No more and linking up. How can we make that work? How can we put that into play? And so I thought, well, no more could be what the statement is, and the linking up could be this that you've seen a fair bit of there, of people linking their arms together. Unfortunately, in some of those, you'll see sometimes you can see fists, which I'm never happy about seeing in them, but that linking up is the symbolic statement that sporting clubs will make. So we did that across the territory, we've got a few clubs doing it at their football matches, and then it caught on. And sometimes we turn up to a community where we've never been, and they're already doing it. They're already going out doing that instead of putting their arms around each other. They will do this and make that strong statement. And then it's spread, as you can see, all these other places have come on board. Basketball have come on, rugby league have come on, rugby union, soccer, cricket, so many of them. So it got a good start. And it did, for a little while, it made a difference. We know that from police reports would give back to us on the community, say, you know what, when those guys linked up on the weekend and they went out and they did this and they made this statement saying no more to family violence, the violence would drop. It would drop down a bit. We said, oh, that's encouraging. But then, a couple of weeks later, because it hadn't happened again, it would start to climb up again and start all over again. So that was a bother for us. We thought, well, what's a way in which we can keep the message out there so it stays there? And we came up with the idea of writing a thing called a Domestic Violence Action Plan, which we call DVAPs. Now, I don't know what I'm telling you today, whether this can work here in Townsville. I don't know whether it could work up at Cooktown. I talked to some of the people from Cooktown a short time ago. They've got high levels of violence there, and Chrissy was telling me here how high the violence is here. So I don't know whether it can work here or not, but maybe it could. I'm going to Sejuna next week because they've got high levels of family violence. So come and talk to us about that. Maybe it'll work here. I got a call from Broome a couple of months ago. Went to visit Broome, and they got it going. They got it running themselves, got it started, got the clubs to do it. And I'll talk more about, once clubs start doing that, sporting clubs, how it draws other people into it until it becomes a force, a real force that can change the attitude. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. But here they are with all the linking of arms, making that statement and getting it to drop for the soccer team, by the way. So what we might do is move away from that now. And the other thing that we found that was really important after the linking of arms was to get communities to endorse that action. So communities need to endorse that action. So we spoke to key people on the community about what that was all about. And they came up with the idea as well, let's have a community march. Let's all get out there and march. Let's make the men hear us cry, no more violence, no more violence. And so they'd arranged, worked together with the police and other people on the community, to get the whole community to get out and march through the streets. They'd have megaphones, they'd have the kids out the front beating drums or whatever, and they'd march through the streets saying, no more violence. So they'd call out the people that they could see standing on the verandas of their houses. You should be here with us, like challenging things, you know. We need you here to march with us. And so we're going to have a look at the Tiwi Islands in just a moment, which most people know, wonderful Tiwi Islands for their great football prowess. They have really high levels of family violence, I can tell you that, high levels of youth suicide, lots of social problems out there. Oh, by the way, look, so you'll see me in lots of these photos here, and you'll see me in lots of these videos, and I'll tell you why that is, not because I want to promote myself up there, but because I was the only one that was actually doing it, because we didn't have funding, you see. And I want to talk about that a little later on, about not having funding and trying to, you know, do the things that need to do. So can we have a look at the march on the Tiwi Islands here, where the whole community went out. So the dance is a dance of joy, you know, like we're going to do something about this, the men are saying, we'll do something. That's their no more dance that they invented. I think you've got to have a water bottle in your hand and you've got to give it a hip, things all part of the no more dance. But that worked for them, and they built a men's group that met regularly, and they talk about what they were going to do to stop the violence, and it worked pretty well. It was bowling along really well, but the challenge, of course, is to plug in the supports there to keep it going, and we couldn't do that because, again, it was that funding issue. It was just me working in that area, and I'm only working at part-time. I work full-time with the ABC, so I couldn't keep up the support to them, so it started to fall over a little bit, and then one of the leading men got involved in a horrible domestic violence case and went to prison, and then it sort of lost its momentum, and then plugged the support back in, lifted up again, and it goes again and gets going again. But gradually, and when I talk about DVAPs, domestic violence action plans, later, it'll show you how that connected back into these men to get it back on track again, if you see where we're going. So the other community I wanted to show you, this is a community we went to where football had been banned on the community, because what had happened in sport when they played each other, they were actually clan groups. They weren't teams as such. They were clan groups playing against each other, so they formed along family lines, and so they played together. And often there were issues between the clan groups, and the men worked out if they wanted to get even over something, the best place you do it out on the sporting field where you don't get arrested for it, you know, or lay on a big tackle or do something. But that's the downside to that is it set off this whole payback thing, that after the game, when the game was finished, payback was going to come from what happened on, do you know what I mean? So it happened outside, then it happened inside, now it's going to happen back outside again. And so this just kept happening all the time. So in the end, the sport was a small celebration, but the fights that were going on after was the much bigger issue that everyone was concerned. So they banned it. They said, that's it, no more. So sport, this thing that we take for granted and we think is really good for us to be part of, they banned it. They said, we're not going to have it anymore because that's what keeps happening. And another thing was happening at the same time. Women were starting to play Australian rules football in numbers. Many numbers were coming in. So this community here, which we'll show you, I think this is the one, this is the 9 News one, is that what you got? Let's have a look at this anyway, he'll explain, let's have a look. And they kept it going. 70% they reduced it just by those simple little things, you know, getting women to be part of the footy, you know, because when the committee would sit down and work out what was going to happen in the coming season, women were having their say. This is what we think we should be doing. This is what we should do. And the thing they challenged, which I thought was fantastic, was the language of sport. We all love sport, you know, but the language we've learned to live with is the language that influences the kids. Some of the list here are some of the things you will hear at a sporting event or when commentators are doing sport. Not me. So things like smashed, whipped, walloped, hammered, thrashed, belted, beat, whacked, crushed, stomped on. That's the language of sport that gets used, you know. Things and things like they lost, you got beaten, you know, you're a loser. Do you know what that means to men when they walk off the field at the end of the game and they're a loser? So we challenge that and say, let's do away with that. Let's not say anyone's a loser. Let's say one team wins, one team doesn't win. Let's use that instead. It's a better way of talking about it. So that changing how our whole look at sport can change that. So I've been, you know, so in my role I get opportunities to go and call the sport in different places. I've been the MCG, you know, 70,000 people watching Geelong play Port Adelaide. Great game of football, fantastic. And Geelong win and Port Adelaide don't. And Port Adelaide are walking out of the ground. You should see their faces. These people drove all the way from Adelaide to come to Melbourne to a footy match. They're walking out. It's as though someone died in their family. Their jaws are hanging on the ground. They're almost crying. They're sad. They're miserable. They're blaming their players. They're blaming the umpires. Do you know what I mean? Like that. What is that? What is going on out there? I mean, I understand the passion for sport. I know it's really important, but we've got to learn to adapt to not winning. When we talk to teams before they play, say, hey, let's make something clear here. One team's going to win, one team's not going to win. That's what happens out there. That's what you were faced with. What are you going to do if you don't win? What's your plan? So and to talk to us. So I'll tell you, we went to Wadeye, little community up north of Darwin, where they've had grand final violence for 10 years after the game. Terrible violence, police arresting people in the streets after. And we met and we spoke with the sporting teams and said, let's have a discussion about when you don't win on grand final day, what are you going to do? And so they came up with this idea that at the end of the game, we're going to walk over to where the team that won and we're going to say, well done, good. And I remember giving them a little bit of advice that my mother gave me. She said, don't get bitter, get better. And I said to them, don't be angry about this, tell them next time we come back we're going to be better. We'll be better for the next time that we play. So they took that on board. It was quite good to see. And we took the Bishop over. Bishop Eugene Hurley, who loves his footy, came across to Wadeye, walked out on the ground and blessed the game. I'm going to bless this game. This is a holy gathering. I'm going to bless it to be a good game. Don't be violent to each other. Made a speech to them. We made a speech. And they played the game in the spirit that the game should be played. And at the end of the game, one team won by a point. And in the past, there was going to be mayhem. But there was no mayhem at the end of the game. The losing team, not all of them, but a few of them begrudgingly trundled across to the winning team. So well done, fellas, you know. Well done. You wait till next year, you know, that sort of stuff. So still the passion burns there, but at least it stopped. And there was no violence after we checked in with the police, and a month later talked to the police about it again. Still no violence from the footy. Other bits of violence happening, but not happening because of the footy. So do you think that's a good thing? It sort of gets sport where it has to be, you know. Let me remind you of this, you know. 8 million Australians every year, every weekend rather, are involved in sport. 8 million of us. You know, that's a massive amount of people, you know. And we're there for our team, we're there for the Cowboys, you know. I was there for the Cowboys when they come up and beat Parramatta and Darwin last year, you know. I was reporting on the side, they go, you Cow. Do you know what I mean? We feel for our teams, you know, we want them to win. But it's recreation. It's not life and death, it's not war, it's just recreation. It's a thing we do as part of our life. We have to get it in its right place. But so they did a pretty good job at Wadeye, and they continued on. They've gone back a bit now. Again, that problem I was saying before about not being able to keep the support in place for them, it drops off a little bit. But we did work on a thing called a Domestic Violence Action Plan. So these are plans. They look a bit, and I'll give you a little bit of an example. This is one here. So this is a club in Darwin, which is not going to come up on there, but we'll hold those others off for a second. So this is a football club that plays in Darwin. It's called Nightcliff, the Tigers. Any Darwin people here? You know Nightcliff? I saw someone nod, I thought they might know. Yeah, but this is Nightcliff Football Club. They've been going for a long time. The last grand final they won, 1964, before decimal currency. And ever since then, well, it was 6 weeks to get in. 1964, that's when they last won. Every year since, they're saying, we've got to get better. We've got to get tougher. We've got to get hard at the ball. We've got to get tough coaches. And they just kept doing it more, and still they didn't win. And then in the end, they had a terrible case of family violence that happened with one of their players, with his girlfriend, who was actually playing footy in the new Nightcliff women's team, which had just started. and he hit it. He punched it. Really bad, savage attack. The women from the team went round the next day to pick her up to come and play football. She wouldn't let them in. So women know. You go to someone's house, they're inside, you know, they won't let you in. They know what's happened. So those women got in. They finally got in and they saw her. And they went back to the club. Representatives of the women's team went back to the club and said, this club has to do something about that. We can't have a club that... This discredits our club. This is a terrible thing and it shouldn't happen. And so the club then talked to us about writing this plan, the Domestic Violence Action Plan, which they wrote. They brought the women in, they sat down and they wrote and said, this is what we will do to stop. That guy, by the way, got challenged, went to court. Chrissy, you were there to represent him, but he was in court. I think he got sentenced to 3 months in jail. Now, part of this plan here said that if you're found guilty of an offence of family violence and you go to jail for it, when you come back, you can only come back and be included in this club if you come and talk to the women and to the men and to the next level down, like this Premier League and Division, like the top 2 levels. In the change room with the door shut, you stand in front of them, you tell us what you did and you tell us what you're going to do to stop doing that in the future, otherwise we don't want you. And so he knew that when he sat in. He told me when he was sitting in prison, he said, I sat there in that 3 months, every day thinking to myself, what have I done? His wife had rung him up and said, I'm going. I'm out of here, I'm not staying here. His son wrote him a letter and said, Dad, don't talk to me. Our relationship's over. Do you know? And so he's saying, I'm now over. And he said, Charlie, it took me 7 seconds to punch her. 7 seconds. And now this. I've got to make sure people understand that. And so when he came out of prison, we put that group together, he went in the room and he spoke to them. And they invited only me in to listen to it. And he gave them such an impassioned speech about doing something for family violence. He said, this is what will happen. You look in the eyes of those men. And normally men will walk up to him and say, don't worry about it, brother, it's okay. Not this time. They walked up and hugged him and said, we've got to stop this. We have to stop it for all of us, you know. And so they wrote this plan, and in it they wrote very strongly in there about what you have to do at the end of it. And a strange thing happened. 1964, still thinking about the glory days, and then they started to think, if we write a domestic violence action plan and we get the message out there, this will be a long-term plan, young players are more likely to come and want to play for us, instead of just going off and playing for the St Mary's and the winning teams. And that's what happened. When this became public knowledge and it was in the papers and the media covered it, thank the media, we'll talk about them a little later in there, what they don't do, but they actually covered this. And lots of young players, families started saying, let's play for Nightcliff. And so they actually then their under 14s become twice as big, 2 teams. Under 16, 2 teams, getting bigger. And so those young players now are coming through the ranks, under 14s to under 16s to under 18s, and then up into men's competition. So in the last 2 years, and I'm sad that the story doesn't have a fairy tale ending, but in the last 2 years they've got to play either in a preliminary final or a grand final. They haven't won it yet. But why they're doing it is because those young players now have progressed up through the ranks to where they become very good players that can play for Nightcliff. And one day, I hope them to come back, if you invite me back in 5 years, I can come back and say they finally won a flag. But yeah, it's a good story, isn't it? Because then they want to play for you and not go and play somewhere else. Because the families will say to them, driven by the mums, I must say, you know, if we're going to send our little ones off to play footy, let's go and play for a club that actually has a domestic violence action plan. So that's where they would want to go. I know this stuff is not, you know, it's common sense stuff, I know, you know, so I hope I'm not preaching to you and you already know all of this stuff I've been thinking about it, but it can work. So I think we're going to have a look at a domestic violence action plan, because here, Parramatta, don't boo them. They let North Queensland win a Darwin last year. But they wrote this, because they rang us up and said, we've got problems with family violence at our club, we want to do something about it. So they wrote, let's have a look, let's scroll down. So this is an old one, this is, I didn't want to give them the new one because of breach of confidentiality. Here's the plan. So they write it down, this is the whole there. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to engage on the national level in domestic violence groups. So, you know, they'll probably get involved with White Ribbon and Outwatch, you know, like places like that. That's what they intended to do. I'm not sure whether they are, Coden may know whether they are or not. We'll raise awareness within the Eels community. They told us that the Parramatta Eels have a supporter base of 500,000 people, 500,000 people are supporters of Parramatta and the Parramatta Eagles, you know. Maybe they inflated that. But as they said, but they can reach, because anyone who wants to be a member of their club, this is what they stand for, you know. So they make it very strong there on what they can do, education. If we pause that for a second, they invited me to talk to all their staff, so 50 staff, mainly women, but a lot of men as well. And so I had like 20 minutes to talk to them. So the first time they publicly had a discussion about family violence within their club. And so I started talking to them, sitting outside, you know, on these bench chairs. I started talking to them and telling them the stories about what we need to do, what we're thinking. And I see tears in the eyes of some of the women, you know. And I'm thinking to myself, these women have either witnessed family violence or are current victims of family violence, you know. They're living in a violent relationship, you know. And this club doesn't even know it. This club doesn't know that it's going on. And so there was a strong feeling, yeah. Again, the women are saying, yes, this is a good thing for our club to do. And so they write the strong things and raise awareness throughout all levels of the club, of support to what they're saying. So if you identify someone being impacted by family violence, the club has a responsibility to do so, not somebody else. You don't bring someone else up. The club has to fix that up. And they had a couple of players you might remember in recent times were charged with family violence. And one of them, they said, we're going to stand you down until such time as this matter gets dealt with. And so they stood him down for a while. But they continued to pay him. They said, here's the deal, we'll continue to pay you, stand you down, pay you, but we will make sure that a percentage of your money goes to your family, because he was estranged from his family. So they said, this percentage of your earnings is going to be channeled. Isn't it a good thing? When clubs can be that strong about it, it can make a difference. So anyway, just quickly, yeah, so that's Parramatta one, so that's at the NRL level. So we get out of that one. So that was a national team, you know, the Parramatta. This is a local football team up in northeast Arnhem Land, up at near Gove and Nullarbor, people know. So they write their own little plan. So it's much more rudimentary. I mean, it's much more simple and plain, you know. And so with these domestic violence action plans, you start wherever you want. It can just simply be two things. You can say our plan is to raise awareness, you know, within the club. And the second thing we're going to do is we're going to have a no more match 3 times a year where everyone is committed to linking arms, making statements and do those sorts of things. You just start there and then you keep building on it because it's a living document that you own. So there they just wrote there, women and children and men have the same rights before the law, blah, blah, blah. Perpetrators and victims need to be supported throughout the relevant treatment. And again, they have an understanding in there that if you've committed an act of family violence, this is a tricky one, isn't it? Because, you know, legally, you're not guilty of anything yet. You're either about to be charged or you're going to be charged. So what power does the club has? The club says it can make the decision about who plays and who doesn't play. That's their right to make that decision. And if you're seen as someone who brings the club into disrepute of what you're doing, then they don't have to play you. They don't have to put you in. Anyway, that's that one. And then, as we skip on, we might go to this. This is an international one. This is the first international team to write. This is the Australian women's baseball team, the Emeralds, who I'm sure not many of you would have heard of in this room here. But they're a great Australian team. They go and play all over the place. They love baseball. They're really good. I went to Jakarta with them and we met with the young women over there and talked about it. Went to Bali with them. Yeah, Bali. So we had time to talk to some of the schools there. But they're very clear about what the Emeralds say. So this is a women's DVAP. I call them DVAPs, domestic violence action plan, but that's a women's one. They take on that. So the national sporting teams have responsibility to both the communities they represent and Australia as a whole. So they see it much bigger, much broader, and what they can actually do to get the message out there. Might just click forward on that, I think. Yeah, that's the case. So they make statements, you know. So they get good buy-in, I reckon, which is pretty good. So I'm proud of them. Actually, they changed their socks at their national championships this year in Geelong a couple of months ago. Their normal socks, they changed them to orange socks which is that there's no more thing. So they're orange socks and they had there's no more written on the outside of their sock, the logo on there. And every team that played, every state, including Queensland, they'd all played, all wore those socks as a statement that they're standing up to say no more to family violence. So you expect no less from the women's team to stand up and do that. Now, if we can just look at going to the future. So talking to people out bush, and this is very much about the bush, it's difficult to get people to understand the messaging you're giving. So if you try and talk to them in English, it's their second language, and it takes them a while to actually get it. And as I said before, you've got to try and just keep the language where people can understand it. But there's some people who actually are now doing some work out bush that we're a bit interested in. Can we play that U-turn one, please? So this is teaching people about U-turn, but it's actually teaching them in their own language. Maybe we can stop that. Yeah, thank you. So the message here is that when they advertise this on the community, so we're going to teach about U-turns because people are getting killed with U-turns, they advertise in English, they get like 20 people come along. When they advertise it in Yolnamata, their language, they get like 50, 60 people that come along to listen to it because they could follow that. I was there when they did that one in language and there was the biggest group, So I'm thinking to myself, this is what we should be doing with our lessons that we want to teach around family violence. We want to share, let's put it in their own language. They had one in Kimberley Creole, which was really good. It can reach a whole range of different people. So in the Gringy language, the Wabri language, all different languages. We should start thinking about that so people, especially those people out in the bush, can hear those messages. I'll leave you this last one before we can go to the Q&A. These are the kids on one of the communities. They marched this one of the marches that they did. They marched through the street. When we went away, they wrote their own song. They're pretty creative, and they got hold of the people on there that did videos, and they made a video about no more violence. And I say this, if we can't respond to the call from kids, who are we? Do you know what I mean? What are we if the kids can't ask for it? Have a look at this, I think this might. We hear them, don't we? We do hear them.